My boyfriend accidentally left the call. Connected. I heard him mock my miscarriages and plot to steal my $5 million trust. I pretended I heard nothing for 3 weeks. My name is Sophia Bennett. I'm 33 years old. 3 weeks before that phone call, I believed my life was finally beginning again. 3 weeks after it, everything I thought I had lost became the very thing that saved me. The rain hammered against my windshield so violently that evening, the highway blurred into gray streaks of headlights and water. Traffic barely moved across the I-90 overpass. My windshield wipers worked furiously, but every few seconds another curtain of rain swallowed the road. I smiled anyway. Ethan had texted that he'd be working late, so I decided to surprise him with fresh pasta and the bottle of wine we'd been saving. For a few peaceful minutes, life still felt ordinary. I tapped his name through Bluetooth. He answered on the third ring. "What is it?" he asked, sounding distracted. "I got off early. I'm in the middle of something. I just wanted—" "We'll talk later." The line clicked, but the call never disconnected. My dashboard timer kept climbing, 011, 012, 013. At first I assumed the Bluetooth had frozen. Then I heard a chair scrape, a door close, and Ethan's voice return, lighter and more relaxed than I'd ever heard it with me. Except it wasn't the voice he used with me. His voice was lighter, relaxed, almost playful. "My God," he laughed. "Sometimes she doesn't stop talking." Another laugh answered him, a voice I would have recognized anywhere. The second voice belonged to Olivia Harper, Ethan's ex, my closest friend, and the woman who had stood beside me through every miscarriage. That laugh echoed through my car. "I just don't want my baby growing up confused about who her real family is," Olivia said softly. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as traffic crawled through the rain. A horn blared somewhere behind me, but the entire world suddenly sounded distant. Ethan lowered his voice. "Relax. The inheritance lands next month. Once her father's trust transfers into our joint account, I move everything. Offshore. Then I end things." Instead of racing, my heartbeat slowed to an eerie calm, as though my mind had decided panic could wait until there was nothing left to understand. Olivia laughed again. "So she'll never see it coming? She still thinks love fixes everything." Another pause. Then Ethan spoke the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. "She's already proven her body doesn't work." He laughed quietly. The miscarriages made that obvious. Neither of them hesitated, apologized, or sounded remotely guilty. The woman who had wiped tears from my face in hospital waiting rooms laughed at the cruelest moment of my life. The man who used to promise we'd keep trying for a family made my grief into entertainment. The recording lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds, but it was enough to erase 6 years of trust. When the line finally disconnected, I didn't scream or cry. I simply sat there, too numb to react. I pulled onto the shoulder, gripped the steering wheel, and sat through the rain until the numbness finally replaced the shock. I replayed the recording 3 times until every word became impossible to forget. No one would ever convince me I'd misunderstood what I'd heard. I drove somewhere other than home. 42 minutes later, I walked into my father's office. My father, Harold Bennett, had built Bennett Capital over 4 decades. People called him intimidating, but his greatest strength was quietly seeing people for who they really were. His longtime assistant, Margaret, saw my face and immediately opened his office door without asking questions. "Dad!" He looked up, studied my face for 2 silent seconds, then shifted his gaze to the phone in my hand. Dad stood the moment he saw my face. Without a word, I handed him my phone and pressed play, then folded my hands together before they could start shaking. He closed his eyes and listened without interrupting. For 4 minutes, Ethan's voice and Olivia's laughter filled the office until the truth became impossible to deny. Olivia's laughter. For 4 minutes, the office echoed with Ethan's plans for my inheritance and his cruel jokes about my miscarriages. When the recording ended, Dad neither sighed nor cursed. He simply opened his eyes. "What do you want?" Dad asked. "Justice." He held my gaze. "Or revenge?" "Both." For the first time that evening, he almost smiled. "Good." He reached for the office landline instead of his cell phone. He called Martin Caldwell, the attorney who had represented our family for nearly 20 years. Then he called Richard Lawson, a former federal financial investigator whose entire career had been built dismantling sophisticated fraud schemes. Neither conversation lasted longer than 2 minutes. He gave Martin and Richard exactly 3 weeks to investigate every detail without making a single mistake. After hanging up, he looked back at me. "Does Olivia know how much your trust is worth?" "I never told her." "Ethan did." It wasn't a question, so I simply nodded. In an instant, every strange purchase, interrupted conversation, and sudden interest in my trust finally made sense. Dad leaned forward. "You'll go home, smile, cook dinner, ask about his day, and follow your usual routine. Most importantly, don't give him a single reason to suspect you've heard that recording." "I can do that." He studied me quietly. "Can you?" I thought about every compromise I'd made and every instinct I'd ignored just to keep our relationship alive. Then I looked him directly in the eye. "I've been pretending everything was fine for years. This time, I'm pretending on purpose." He studied me in silence for several seconds before finally nodding. "I believe you." That night I drove home. Ethan greeted me with a kiss on the forehead. He asked about the traffic, complimented dinner, smiled the way he always had, and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Every gesture looked loving until I realized his kindness appeared only when it benefited him. That night I lay beside him, pretending to sleep while replaying every word of the recording until dawn. After he fell asleep, I stared into the darkness, replaying the recording, my miscarriages, 6 wasted years, and Olivia's laughter until dawn finally arrived. Then, sometime before dawn, I made the most important decision of my life. The next 3 weeks wouldn't be about surviving betrayal. They would be about convincing Ethan nothing had changed. The next morning, I allowed myself one final moment to remember who I'd been before that phone call changed everything. Before that phone call, I still believed distance came from work, not betrayal. Then Ethan shifted beside me. His arm slid across my waist. "Morning," he murmured. I closed my eyes, forced myself not to flinch, and answered, "Morning." He kissed my shoulder. "We should do something nice this weekend." I turned slightly. "Oh? Maybe dinner somewhere quiet. Just us." His voice was soft, affectionate, and carefully measured. A week earlier, that tone would have reassured me. Now it sounded like a salesman preparing to close the biggest deal of his life. "That sounds nice," I said. He smiled, and I returned it without hesitation. That was the first lie I told perfectly. By Wednesday, Richard Lawson's first report arrived. We met in Bennett Capital's smallest conference room, a windowless space where Richard spread his evidence across the table. Richard Lawson, a former federal financial investigator, wasted neither words nor time. He slid the first surveillance photograph across the table, Ethan entering the Kimpton Hotel. The photographs followed one after another, Ethan entering the Kimpton Hotel at 7:42 p.m., Olivia arriving 12 minutes later, then the two of them together inside. The photographs documented 14 meetings over 4 months. Evidence has a strange mercy. It removes uncertainty, silences hope, and leaves no room for comforting lies. "He's been careful," Richard said, "but not careful enough." Martin adjusted his glasses. "Financial trail?" Richard tapped the folder. "That's worse." He turned to another section. Ethan had opened 2 separate accounts in the past 8 months. One account was in Ethan's own name. The other, hid behind a shell company, Richard quickly traced back to him. Small transfers had been leaving our joint account regularly. The transfers were small enough to avoid suspicion, yet frequent enough to quietly drain the account. The withdrawals ranged from a few $1,000s to just under $10,000, carefully disguised as consulting expenses. Each withdrawal looked ordinary, exactly the kind a trusting partner would never question. Richard looked at me. "We've confirmed approximately $340,000 in unauthorized transfers." The room suddenly felt smaller. I'd trusted Ethan enough to place my inheritance into our joint account because I genuinely believed we were building a future together. He had treated it like a practice run. "And the trust distribution?" "Scheduled for next month," Dad said. "Not anymore." He turned to me. "I stopped it the night you came in." For the first time since hearing the recording, I felt my composure crack. "Thank you." He nodded once, as though gratitude embarrassed him. "From Ethan's perspective," Martin said, "nothing changes yet. He needs to believe the money is still coming." Richard closed the folder. "That belief keeps him predictable." The word predictable echoed in my mind all the way home because it described Ethan perfectly. "You've seemed lighter lately," he said. I kept cutting carrots. "Have I?" "Yeah." His chin rested near my shoulder. "Maybe we're finally turning a corner." I almost laughed. Instead, I placed the knife down and turned into his arms. "Maybe we are." His relief vanished the moment Olivia's name lit up his phone, though he tried to hide it. The second week, Olivia asked me to go shopping with her. "Baby things," she said brightly over the phone. "I need your eye. Ethan says I pick everything too expensive." Her voice was warm and painfully familiar, the voice of someone who knew my coffee order, my childhood fears, and every fragile place inside me. "Of course," I said. Saturday morning, I drove to her apartment. She came downstairs in cream leggings and an oversized sweater, one hand resting against her stomach. 7 months pregnant, she looked effortlessly beautiful, the same woman I'd once been proud to call my closest friend. She handed me a coffee. Still oat milk, half sweet. I took it. "You're the only person who remembers." She smiled. "I remember everything about you." The words hit harder than she could possibly imagine. She remembered every hospital visit and every miscarriage, which made what she'd done even harder to understand. We walked to a boutique on Oak Street filled with soft blankets, tiny shoes, wooden mobile nenaishes, and pastel walls that smelled faintly of lavender. Olivia lifted a little white onesie and held it against herself. We chatted about baby clothes as naturally as we always had, and that ordinary conversation felt more disturbing than any argument. Her smile widened. "I knew you'd understand." I watched her fold the onesie over her arm. For a moment, I looked at her unborn child and reminded myself that innocence belonged only to the baby, never to the adults. I looked away before sympathy could cloud my judgment. Olivia moved through the store happily, asking about names, colors, nursery themes. "Do you ever think about trying again?" she asked suddenly. My hand froze on a tiny knitted blanket. "What?" "For a baby," she asked gently, as though she still had the right to touch the most painful part of my life. I turned toward her. Her expression looked perfectly concerned, practiced enough that I almost believed it out of habit. For years, I had mistaken that expression for love. "Sometimes," I said. Her gaze dropped. "You're stronger than you think, Soph." I smiled. "So are you." She didn't hear the blade under it. Outside, when we hugged goodbye, she held me a second longer than usual. You seem peaceful lately, she whispered. I am. And I meant it. I hadn't forgiven anyone. I was simply at peace because I finally knew the truth. When I returned to my car, I sat there with the baby boutique bag beside me and called Richard. She's far too comfortable, I told Richard. Richard was quiet for a moment. When people think they've already won, they stop protecting themselves. I looked through the windshield at Olivia's building. Then let's let them keep reading. By the end of the second week, Ethan had begun asking casual questions about the trust. He never asked directly. Did your father mention the paperwork? Do you know which account they'll use? Should we talk to someone about tax strategy? Every question sounded caring, and every vague answer I gave only made him more confident. Dad says everything is on schedule. Martin is handling it. I don't want to stress about money yet. Ethan kissed my temple every time. That's what I'm here for. I almost smiled. By then I knew exactly why he was still beside me. Then Richard's third report arrived. This time he did not email a summary. He requested an in-person meeting. Dad was already seated when I entered the conference room. Martin stood near the wall, reading a document with a frown deep enough to make my stomach tighten. Richard looked at me. We found something unrelated to the money. I sat down slowly. What? He placed one page on the table. It wasn't another photograph or bank statement. This time Richard placed a timeline on the table. Olivia's pregnancy dates, Ethan's travel records, hotel logs, phone records, and one unfamiliar name, Thomas Hale. Richard's voice remained calm. The conception window doesn't line up cleanly with Ethan. My eyes moved over the page. Dates, locations, and travel records all pointed to the same conclusion. Ethan had been in London during part of the conception window. Ethan had been away during part of the window. Thomas Hale had been with Olivia in the same city. Same hotel. Same dates. The room went silent. Dad looked at me carefully. Martin removed his glasses. No one needed to say it aloud. We had all reached the same conclusion. The child Ethan planned to destroy our future for might never have been his in the first place. No one spoke for several seconds. The conference room suddenly felt much smaller. I stared at the name on the report. Thomas Hale. Thomas Hale was just a name on a report, yet it carried enough weight to destroy everything Ethan believed. Richard folded his hands on the table. We're not saying this proves anything. No. It proves there's a significant inconsistency. I looked up. How significant? He opened another folder. The estimated conception window overlaps a 3-week period during which Ethan was in London on business. He slid several documents toward me. Flight records, hotel receipts, credit card transactions, corporate expense reports. Every page placed Ethan thousands of miles away during part of the period Olivia had described as the beginning of her pregnancy. Richard placed one final photograph on top. Olivia, Thomas Hale, leaving the lobby of a London hotel together. Different entrance. Same timestamp. No obvious affection. Nothing dramatic. Just enough. Enough to make certainty disappear. Dad leaned back slowly. I've spent 50 years watching people build lies. He tapped the photograph once. The problem with lies is they almost never belong to only one person. Martin nodded. They overlap, collide, and eventually destroy each other. I looked back at Thomas Hale's name. For weeks I had imagined exposing Ethan, but the investigation had uncovered something even stranger. He had betrayed 6 years together, mocked my miscarriages, and planned to steal millions for a child that might not even be his. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt something closer to disbelief. Greed rarely knows where to stop. It keeps reaching until it destroys the person chasing it. Richard broke the silence. We can investigate further. Dad answered before I could. No. Everyone looked toward him. Richard frowned slightly. If paternity becomes relevant, it isn't relevant. Dad's voice remained calm. Our objective hasn't changed. He turned toward me. You already have everything you need. I understood immediately. The affair, the fraud, the theft, and the recorded conspiracy were already more than enough. Those facts alone were enough. Whether Ethan had also been deceived no longer mattered to our case. I nodded. Leave it. Martin closed the file. The timing is almost poetic. Dad gave him a brief look. I prefer practical. So do I. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. As Richard packed his folders, he stopped beside me. They're becoming careless. What makes you say that? They believe they've already won, Richard said. That's exactly when people become careless. That evening, Ethan came home carrying flowers. He brought white lilies, flowers that had once been my favorite before they became another reminder of him. You deserve these, he said. What are they for? He shrugged. Can't I surprise my girlfriend? I accepted them with the same smile I'd perfected over the previous 2 weeks. They're beautiful. He kissed my forehead and said he'd missed me. I knew better. He didn't miss me. He missed what he believed I was about to give him. While I arranged the flowers in water, he wandered into the kitchen. Dad say anything about the trust? There it was again. Another casual question. Another carefully disguised attempt. Not really. He still expects everything next month? As far as I know. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Good. Exactly the answer he'd hoped to hear. He opened the refrigerator. We should celebrate. I laughed softly. We haven't received anything yet. We will. His confidence was absolute. Watching him became strangely fascinating. Every affectionate gesture suddenly made sense. They appeared whenever money entered the conversation and vanished as soon as it didn't. I wondered how many years it had been happening. Had he always been calculating? Or had calculation slowly replaced love without either of us noticing? I no longer knew. Maybe I never would. 3 days later, Olivia invited me to lunch. I almost declined. Dad encouraged me to go. People reveal themselves most clearly when they feel safe. So I went. We met at our favorite cafe overlooking Lake Michigan. We'd been coming there for nearly a decade. Birthdays, promotions, heartbreak, 3 miscarriages. She had sat across from me at that same table after every hospital visit. Now I watched her stir tea as though none of those memories existed. "You're glowing," she said. I laughed. I was going to say the same thing. She touched her stomach automatically. I finally feel like everything's falling into place. The sentence lingered between us. When Olivia said everything was finally falling into place, I couldn't help wondering how much of that future she believed belonged to me. She looked genuinely happy. That was somehow worse, because genuine happiness built on betrayal isn't fake. It's simply stolen. The waitress arrived. We ordered. For a few minutes, we talked about books, restaurants, and the unusually warm summer weather. Then Olivia smiled. "Ethan's been different lately." I looked up carefully. "Different? Happier." She laughed. "Maybe he's finally relaxing." "I'm glad." "So am I." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You deserve that." My fingers remained still beneath hers. She had no idea how close she sat to the edge of everything. That afternoon, Martin called. "I've completed the legal filings." "So soon?" "We've had nearly 3 weeks." His voice carried quiet satisfaction. "Documentation wins cases. What happens now?" "We wait." "For what?" "For them," he explained calmly. Every transfer, withdrawal, photograph, banking record, timestamp, and signature had been organized into a single airtight case. Everything organized chronologically. No emotional arguments. No speculation. Only evidence. Martin understood something I'd never appreciated before. Truth becomes almost impossible to escape once someone removes all unnecessary emotion from it. Facts never need to raise their voices. They simply refuse to disappear. Later that week, Dad invited me to dinner. Just the 2 of us. We sat in the private dining room at his club. Neither of us mentioned Ethan for almost an hour. Instead, we talked about ordinary things. For nearly an hour, we talked about work, travel, and old family memories before Ethan's name finally entered the conversation. Eventually, Dad put down his fork. "Do you know why I insisted we wait?" "For evidence?" "Partly." He looked directly at me. "I also needed to know whether you were acting from anger or clarity." "And? You've surprised me." "How?" "I expected anger and impulsive decisions," Dad admitted. "Instead, you became patient." "You became patient." I smiled faintly. "I think I ran out of panic that day in the rain." He nodded slowly. "Pain often makes people reckless." "You became disciplined." Coming from him, it felt like praise. The following Monday, Ethan received an email while we were eating breakfast. His entire expression brightened. "What happened?" I asked. "Nothing." He tried to hide the excitement. "Just good news from work." I already knew it wasn't work. Richard had copied Martin on Ethan's recent financial activity. He'd begun preparing the offshore accounts. Large transfers couldn't happen until the trust arrived. But everything else was ready. Watching him casually eat breakfast while mentally spending money that would never exist was almost surreal. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was curious. How would someone like Ethan react when certainty disappeared? Would he deny? Beg? Threaten? Blame? Or simply collapse beneath the weight of his own choices? I would find out soon enough. That evening, Dad called. "It's time." I knew exactly what he meant. "The dinner?" "Yes." I smiled. "I'll host." "Good." "Who?" "You." "Ethan." "Olivia." Only 3 people. Exactly as the original plan required. Dad wanted only the 3 of us there. No audience would distract from the truth. "I'll tell Ethan I want to celebrate the trust. He'll come." "I know." "What about Olivia?" Dad smiled faintly across the phone. "She won't refuse either." After we hung up, I stood alone in my kitchen. Standing in that kitchen, I realized how many of my happiest memories had unfolded in the same place where Ethan's betrayal would finally end. In 3 days, everything inside this room would change. I walked to the cabinet and removed the good dishes. The expensive crystal glasses, the linen napkins reserved for holidays. Then I placed a single sealed envelope on the counter. The envelope contained every photograph, bank record, transcript, and investigative report Richard and Martin had spent 3 weeks preparing. The report that neither Ethan nor Olivia could possibly be prepared to read. The day of the dinner arrived with almost unsettling calm. There was no thunder or dramatic sky, just an ordinary Friday afternoon that gave no hint it would end 3 lives as we knew them. I spent the morning preparing the house. I wasn't preparing a celebration for Ethan. Every detail simply had to be perfect. The dining room table was dressed in crisp white linen. The crystal glasses my mother had loved sparkled beneath the chandelier. Fresh white tulips stood in the center of the table, Olivia's favorite flowers. For years, Olivia had brought white tulips to every important celebration in our lives. Tonight, I bought them myself. There was something strangely satisfying about placing them exactly where she always had. The envelope still rested on the kitchen counter, waiting exactly where I'd left it. Everything was ready. Inside it sat 3 weeks of evidence. Inside were photographs, financial records, bank statements, transfer histories, and corporate filings arranged in perfect order. Every page arranged chronologically. There were no accusations, no emotional notes, only evidence. Martin had insisted on that. Emotion gives dishonest people room to argue. Evidence doesn't. At 4 that afternoon, Dad called. Everything ready? Yes. You nervous? I considered the question. No. You've changed, Dad said quietly. I know, I answered. His voice softened. I'm proud of you. The words caught me unexpectedly. Growing up, Dad rarely offered compliments. Not because he lacked affection, because he believed confidence should come from actions rather than praise. Hearing those words now meant more than I could explain. Thank you. We'll talk tomorrow. After hanging up, I looked around the quiet house. The silence no longer frightened me. It belonged to me. Ethan came home carrying an expensive bottle of Bordeaux. Thought tonight deserved something special. I smiled. It does. He wrapped his arms around my waist. You look beautiful. I wore the navy blue dress he'd once told me made my eyes look brighter. The compliment would have made me blush months earlier. Now I simply thanked him. He looked genuinely excited, not because of dinner, because he believed the trust money had arrived. I could almost see him calculating. In his mind, the $5 million trust had already become offshore accounts and a new life with Olivia. He disappeared upstairs to change. While he was gone, I glanced toward the envelope one final time. Everything was ready. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Olivia stood outside wearing an elegant cream dress that gently framed her pregnancy. She held another bouquet of white tulips. For one strange second, neither of us moved. Then she laughed. I should have guessed you'd already have flowers. I know your favorites. She smiled warmly. You always remember. Yes, I remembered everything. Every birthday, every secret, every promise, every lie. She hugged me carefully. I hugged her back. Her perfume was exactly the same. Jasmine. It instantly carried me back to hospital waiting rooms and late-night phone calls. Memory has a cruel habit of preserving genuine moments even after the people inside them prove they were false. Ethan appeared at the staircase. His face lit up when he saw her. His face lit up for only a fraction of a second, far too quickly for most people to notice. But I did. Neither of them lingered. Neither stared too long. Their restraint almost impressed me. Their restraint felt rehearsed, as though they'd repeated moments like this many times before. Dinner began pleasantly. Conversation flowed effortlessly. We drifted through harmless topics. Travel, books, work, politics, even the weather, carefully avoiding the truth sitting at the table with us. Normal subjects. Safe subjects. Ethan laughed more than usual. Olivia seemed relaxed. Anyone watching from outside would have seen 3 close friends sharing an intimate evening. Only I knew 2 of them had already planned my future without me. Halfway through the appetizer, Ethan checked his phone. Just for a moment. Then again. Then a third time. His banking app. He tried hiding it. He wasn't nearly as subtle as he believed. Olivia noticed too. Their eyes met for less than a second. A tiny, controlled exchange that would have meant nothing to anyone else. Enough to reassure each other. Enough for me to notice. Dad had once told me something I'd dismissed as paranoia. Liars think everyone watches faces. Professionals watch timing. Now I finally understood. They never looked guilty. They looked synchronized. Every glance, every pause, and every sudden change of topic followed the same quiet rhythm. For years, I'd mistaken that rhythm for coincidence instead of coordination. Dessert was chocolate souffle, Ethan's favorite. He smiled. I knew tonight was going to be perfect. I hope so. Olivia raised her wine glass. To new beginnings. The irony almost made me laugh, but I simply raised my glass instead. To truth. Neither of them reacted. They couldn't possibly know how literal I meant it. We drank. A comfortable silence settled over the table. Then Ethan checked his banking app again. He checked his banking app for the 4th time. When nothing appeared, his smile faltered for only a moment. He recovered almost instantly. You okay? I asked. Just work. Busy? You know how it is. I did. Far better than he imagined. I stood. I have something. Ethan looked up immediately. Olivia followed my movement. I walked into the kitchen, picked up the envelope, returned slowly. The room felt so quiet that each step toward the table echoed in my ears. I stopped beside Ethan's chair. The trust arrived today. His eyes widened, exactly as I'd expected. I wanted tonight to celebrate our future. He reached for the envelope before I finished speaking. He tore the envelope open with the excitement of someone convinced his future had finally arrived. The first page was a photograph of Ethan and Olivia walking hand in hand into the Kimpton Hotel on a Thursday evening. He blinked. More photographs followed. Dinner together, the parking garage, and finally Ethan outside Olivia's apartment late that night. Every photograph carried timestamps and dates that quietly destroyed every excuse before it could be spoken. The confidence vanished from Ethan's face almost instantly. Olivia leaned forward. What is this? Neither of them looked at me. They couldn't. Their eyes remained trapped inside the envelope. Next came the financial report. Every transfer, account, shell company, routing number, and signature had been documented with meticulous precision. Martin had highlighted the totals in yellow. $340,000. Quietly siphoned from our joint account. 8 months. Systematic. Intentional. Documented. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment. I could actually hear the silence. Then came the transcript. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, long enough to destroy 6 years of trust. Formatted exactly like a screenplay. Ethan. Sophie's unbelievably naive. Olivia. I don't want my baby growing up confused about who her real family is. Ethan, once the trust money arrives, page after page preserved every sentence, every laugh, and every insult exactly as we'd spoken them that night. Then, the line. She's already proven her body doesn't work. No one spoke. The room fell into a silence so heavy it felt almost physical. Olivia's hands began trembling. Ethan's lips parted. Nothing came out. I sat back down calmly, folded my hands together. The money never entered our account. Finally, both of them looked at me. My father stopped the transfer the night I played him the recording. Silence. Our attorney has spent the last 3 weeks documenting every financial movement. Another silence. The investigators were extremely thorough. Ethan swallowed hard. Sophie, I raised one finger. He stopped talking, not because I interrupted loudly, because something in my expression told him there was no version of this conversation that ended in forgiveness. I continued quietly. This house has never belonged to us. It belongs to Bennett Holdings. Dad purchased it before I moved in. I've always been the only authorized resident. Ethan stared. Confusion replaced panic. Then panic returned stronger than before. His voice finally emerged. You planned all this? No. I met his eyes. You did. Olivia whispered my name. Sophie. I looked at her. The woman who had once cried with me after every miscarriage. The woman who had promised she'd always be family. I felt nothing. Not hatred. Not satisfaction. Only distance. The kind that can never be crossed again. There is one document left. Neither of them moved. Neither wanted to touch it. So I picked it up myself. I slid the final report slowly across the polished dining table until it stopped directly between them. Richard Lawson's investigation. London. Hotel records. Travel timelines. Medical estimates. An unfamiliar name. Thomas Hale. Both of them looked down simultaneously. Neither of them understood. Not yet, but I watched their expressions begin to change. The certainty that had united them for months started cracking apart, and within seconds, their greatest betrayal was about to become each other's. No one reached for the final page. For several long seconds, the only sound in the dining room was the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The silence pressed against the walls harder than any argument could have. Ethan stared at the document but didn't touch it. Olivia looked from the report to me, then back again. Finally, Ethan picked it up. His eyes scanned the first paragraph. Then the timeline. Then the highlighted dates. Confusion quickly gave way to disbelief before something much darker settled across his face. What is this? He asked. His voice no longer carried confidence, only uncertainty. I folded my hands in my lap. A timeline. Olivia leaned toward him. Ethan. He didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the page. Richard Lawson's report was concise, professional, emotionless. It compared Olivia's estimated conception window with Ethan's passport records, airline itineraries, hotel receipts, and verified business meetings in London. The overlap was impossible to ignore. One sentence had been highlighted by Martin. The documented timeline is inconsistent with Mr. Carter being continuously present during the probable conception period. Below it appeared another section. Hotel registration records. 3 separate entries. One name repeated every time. Thomas Hale. Olivia reached for the paper. What does that even mean? Ethan slowly looked up. His face had become almost colorless. Were you seeing someone else? The question landed like broken glass. Olivia blinked. What? You heard me. Ethan. Were you sleeping with Thomas? She stared at him as though she'd forgotten where she was. For a moment, I thought she might deny everything. Instead, she whispered, It happened once. Ethan let out a short, hollow laugh, the kind that escaped when reality arrived faster than the mind could process. Once? She nodded weakly. It was before... Before what? Before we decided... She stopped. She stopped herself a second too late. The truth was already obvious. I watched them carefully. Only weeks earlier, they'd treated me like the weakest person in the room. Now neither of them could hold the other's gaze. Ethan stood so abruptly, his chair scraped violently across the hardwood floor. You told me the baby was mine. I believed it was. You believed? Tears filled her eyes. It was one night. In London. I never thought... You never thought? His voice cracked. You destroyed her. He pointed toward me. You pushed me to leave her. You told me this baby was mine. Olivia's shoulders began shaking. I didn't lie. You guessed. I loved you. The words echoed through the dining room. Ethan stared at her. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him. He had absolutely nothing to say. It was extraordinary to watch. Ethan always had another explanation, another version of events, another polished sentence ready to rescue him, until now. This time he had nothing. The silence belonged entirely to him. I finally spoke. Interesting. Both of them turned toward me. You were both willing to destroy my life. I looked directly at Ethan. You planned to steal $5 million. Then at Olivia. You helped him. Neither interrupted. You laughed while he mocked my miscarriages. Olivia covered her mouth. Tears spilled freely now. I raised my hand gently. No. You've spoken enough. She lowered her eyes. For the first time that night, Olivia looked genuinely ashamed. Whether she regretted betraying me or simply regretted the consequences, I couldn't tell anymore. And I no longer cared. Martin had warned me that guilt often appears only after consequences, and he had been right. I reached beside my chair and picked up another folder. The civil complaint. I placed it in front of Ethan. He looked down. The first page displayed Martin Caldwell's letterhead. Below it, financial misconduct, fraudulent misappropriation of marital assets, civil recovery action. His breathing became noticeably uneven. You've already filed? This morning. He looked at me in disbelief. You divorced me before telling me? I met his eyes calmly. No, you ended us. I completed the paperwork. Another silence. He opened the complaint. Every page contained transfer records, bank statements, corporate registrations, electronic signatures, and forensic accounting summaries. Every dollar, every transfer, and every lie had been documented beyond dispute. He flipped through the pages desperately, as though a different ending might suddenly appear. It never did. Martin had built the case exactly the way my father preferred. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Unavoidable. Ethan finally looked up. Sophie. His voice had become almost pleading. I made mistakes. I shook my head. No, Ethan. Mistakes happen in moments. What you did took months of planning. He rubbed both hands over his face. I can explain. I've already heard your explanation. I wasn't thinking. I tilted my head. You spent 8 months opening offshore accounts, moving money, discussing the plan, and waiting for my inheritance. None of that happened by accident. I paused. That wasn't a mistake. It was a carefully managed project. For the first time all evening, Dad's dry sense of humor echoed inside my head. Ethan had treated betrayal like a business strategy. Now he wanted to call it an accident. Olivia suddenly looked toward me. Sophie, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. No, you don't. I was selfish. Yes. I thought... She stopped. What? I thought Ethan loved me. Her words lingered in the silence. For a brief moment, I almost pitied her, but the feeling disappeared as quickly as it came. Then I remembered the 4-minute and 12-second recording that had erased every instinct toward mercy. You both believed you were building a future. You just couldn't agree on who it was supposed to belong to. Neither answered. I stood. The conversation was over. You have 10 minutes. Ethan frowned. For what? To leave. This isn't your house. It is. I handed him one final document. Property ownership. Bennett Holdings. My father's signature. Purchase date. 3 years before Ethan moved in. His eyes widened again. You knew? I knew enough. I hoped one day you'd love me instead of what surrounded me. He looked down. I was wrong. Olivia slowly stood, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. She looked emotionally exhausted, as though the future she'd imagined had collapsed in a matter of minutes. Like someone who had spent months climbing toward a destination that had vanished beneath her feet. She picked up her purse. Before reaching the front door, she stopped. I'm sorry. I believe she meant the apology, but sincerity couldn't undo what she'd chosen to do. Some apologies arrive too late to repair what they acknowledge. She left without another word. The front door closed softly behind her. Ethan remained standing in the middle of the dining room. The confidence that had always defined Ethan was gone, leaving him looking older and strangely diminished. He tried once. Sophie. I waited. I did love you. I looked at him for several seconds, then asked the only question that mattered. Which did you love more, Ethan, the woman or the inheritance? He couldn't answer. He lowered his head, walked slowly towards the front door. Halfway there, he stopped. Without turning around, he asked quietly, What happens now? I answered honestly, Now. You discover what life feels like when nobody is left to lie to. He closed his eyes, then walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. The house became completely silent. I remained standing beside the dining table. The white tulips still sat in the center of the table beside 3 untouched wine glasses and dessert plates, quiet reminders of a future that no longer existed. I picked up my phone, opened the recording. 4 minutes. 12 seconds. Without listening again, I deleted the recording forever. Long after the front door closed, the house settled into a silence unlike any I'd ever known. The quiet certainty that something was finally over. For 6 years, every room had quietly witnessed the lies. The kitchen, where Ethan held me after stealing from me. The living room, where Olivia comforted me after my miscarriages. And the dining room, where they planned a future without me. Now all of it belonged only to memory. I stood there for several minutes, looking at the 3 wine glasses still resting beneath the chandelier. 3 wine glasses still sat on the table, silent reminders of everyone who had walked into that dinner, believing they controlled the ending. I carried the glasses into the kitchen and washed them slowly, grateful for the comfort of ordinary routines after weeks of pretending. The following morning, my father arrived just after 8. He didn't knock repeatedly. Dad rang the bell once and quietly waited outside. I opened the door before he reached for the bell again. He studied my face before asking, Did you sleep at all? A little. He nodded. That's enough for now. He stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee, exactly the way he'd done after my first miscarriage years earlier. We sat at the kitchen island. Neither of us spoke for almost 5 minutes. Ethan had called 11 times and left 32 messages. Olivia had sent 6. I ignored every one of them. I didn't answer those either. He smiled faintly. You're learning. Martin Caldwell called just before noon. The temporary financial restraining order has been approved. So quickly? The evidence helped. Martin almost sounded amused. Judges have a habit of appreciating organized evidence. He explained that every account connected to Ethan's offshore transfers had already been identified. The forensic accounting team had worked through the night. Because the money had originated from documented marital assets funded directly by my inheritance, the trail was unusually clean. He made one critical mistake, Martin said. He assumed dozens of small thefts would disappear into the background. Martin paused. They never disappear. They simply become evidence. Within 60 days, every known account connected to the transfers had been frozen. The entire $340,000 was recovered. Additional damages, interest, and legal costs increased the total judgment to $412,000. Exactly as Martin had predicted. Documentation mattered. Emotion did not. Ethan tried flowers, letters, and emails before I blocked every attempt to reach me. Then he appeared outside the house. Richard Lawson's security team called before I even noticed. He's sitting outside, Richard's security team told me. What should I do? Nothing. He's hoping for a reaction. Richard answered before I could. He wants a reaction. He won't get one. 20 minutes later, Ethan drove away. He never came back. 3 weeks after the dinner, the first professional consequences arrived. 2 of Ethan's largest consulting clients terminated their contracts. Neither explained why. They didn't need to. Court filings had become public record. Financial publications summarized the lawsuit without sensational headlines. They simply reported the facts. A consultant accused of systematically diverting marital assets. Documented offshore transfers. Civil fraud allegations supported by forensic accounting. His name wasn't printed prominently. It didn't matter. The people who needed to recognize the details did. Business reputations rarely collapse overnight. They disappear one unanswered phone call at a time. 4 months later, I heard about Olivia through a mutual acquaintance. Months later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that the baby's father was Thomas Hale. The paternity test had been completed. The baby wasn't Ethan's. Thomas Hale was the biological father. When I first heard it, I closed my eyes. Not because I felt victorious, because the entire tragedy suddenly seemed even smaller than greed had made it appear. Ethan had destroyed our future, committed fraud, mocked my miscarriages, and risked everything for a child that wasn't even his. All for a fantasy built on assumptions. I never contacted Olivia. She never contacted me again. Some endings don't require another conversation. 7 months after the dinner, Martin called one final time. It's finished, Martin said quietly. Everything has been finalized. Everything? Everything. The settlement concluded faster than anyone expected. Martin credited meticulous preparation. Richard credited the evidence. Dad credited patience. I credited one accidental phone call. Without that accidental recording, I might never have discovered who Ethan really was. A week later, Dad invited me to dinner. Just the 2 of us. The same private restaurant we'd visited throughout my childhood. He ordered the expensive Bordeaux he reserved for life's defining moments. We talked about work, about travel, about whether I planned to renovate the kitchen. Finally, he looked at me. I owe you an apology. I blinked. You? I should have been clearer. When? Before you moved in with Ethan. I smiled gently. You warned me. Not enough. You said he was impressive in rooms. I did. You said I should pay attention to who he became when nobody was watching. Dad looked down at his glass. I should have insisted. I reached across the table and rested my hand over his. No. You respected my choices. I simply wasn't ready to understand your warning. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. That was enough. Neither of us needed to say more. Over the following months, I changed surprisingly little. I kept the house. Not because it reminded me of Ethan, because it never truly belonged to him. I slowly reshaped the house into a place that reflected my future instead of my past. I realized something unexpected one afternoon while making coffee. I realized a house doesn't remember betrayal forever. New memories eventually replace the old ones. Slowly, patiently, one ordinary day at a time. People sometimes ask whether I still hate Ethan. I don't. Number. Hatred requires energy. He no longer deserves any. As for Olivia, I only hoped her daughter would grow up untouched by the choices that had brought her into the world. Because children should never inherit the consequences of choices they never made. That little girl entered the world innocent. She remained the only innocent person in that entire story besides me. Looking back now, people often assume the recording changed my life. It didn't. People often say the recording changed my life, but it really did something far simpler. It revealed the life I had been living all along. The betrayal, the lies, the affair, and the stolen money had all existed long before I heard them. 4 minutes and 12 seconds didn't create any of it. They simply removed the last illusion protecting it. For years, I believed love meant trusting without question. Now I understand something my father tried to teach me long before I was ready to hear it. Trust isn't built by beautiful promises. I learned that trust isn't built on promises, but on consistent actions, quiet loyalty, and honesty when no one is watching. People eventually reveal who they are. The hardest part is believing them the first time. My greatest victory wasn't recovering the money or winning the lawsuit. It was realizing my future had never been stolen, only delayed by the wrong people. The greatest victory was realizing they had never taken my future. They had only removed themselves from it. And once they were gone, for the first time in years, my future belonged entirely to me, and that was worth far more than anything Ethan had ever tried to steal.